Sometimes we forget that Ellen White was actually married to somebody. His name was James White. He didn't live as long as his wife. He died in 1881, and she didn't die until 1915. So we talk more about her. We know about her. She was the messenger of the Lord. But think about what kind of a man James must have been. I don't know if men ever have thought of what it would be like to be married to a prophet. I mean, just think about it. Your wife says to you, honey, I think you need to do this. Or, honey, I think you need to do that. What if your wife said to you, honey, the Lord has shown me that you should do this. Or the Lord has shown me that you should do that. Well, sometimes that happened to James. And James was a strong personality. He would not naturally just do what somebody tells him to do. And yet the evidence is that over and over, when God spoke through Ellen White with a special message for her husband, he accepted. Now, he didn't always know exactly how to make things happen. Think about the first paper, our first little paper, The Present Truth. She had the vision in late 1848, and she was shown that this paper would be small at first, and it should be like streams of light that would go clear around the world. That's November 18, 1848. And when she came out of the vision, she told him that he should start a little paper. He had no idea how to start a paper. Now, that's different than refusing. He just didn't know how to do it. And it wasn't until July of 1849, so several months later, that James White actually brought out the first issue of The Present Truth. Throughout his life, he was always doing things. He was a very active man. I think sometimes he may have embarrassed his wife a little bit because he was so energetic and so creative and all. One time she was not feeling well. She was sick and they were traveling, and they came into Kalamazoo, Michigan, and they had speaking appointments there. They were going to get off the train in Kalamazoo. As I say, she didn't feel good anyway, but it was the state fair was going on, and the platform was just packed full of people. And so James is looking out the window. He knows his wife doesn't feel good, and he's thinking, how in the world am I going to get us off here? Because everybody's going to be, as soon as the train stops, everybody's going to be pushing onto the train, and we've got to try to get off, and she's not feeling good anyway. So he came up with one of his creative ideas. He just picked her up, and he said, make way, sick woman, make way, sick woman. And everybody started partying, and they got off, and somebody pushed off their luggage, and they made their appointment. To give you another idea about James and the kind of creative, he didn't let things bother him a lot. One time he was preaching, and as he was preaching, he got so animated in his sermon that he fell right off the platform, right in the middle of while he was preaching. Now, most people, if you fall off the platform, that would cause you to stop right there. But according to the reports, no, not James. He just worked it in as a sermon illustration, climbed right back up on the platform, kept preaching the whole time. People thought he'd planned it. They thought he was part of his sermon. No, he admitted it wasn't, but since it happened, just go with it. So James was that kind of person. James was a great builder. A number of our institutions, a number of our major papers were started by James White. He was an organizer. He had the ability to make money. He had the ability to raise money. And when you look at lists of donations, it might embarrass us today if we did what they did back in those days, but in those days, if there was some appeal for means, then they would print right in the church paper, in the review, how much, they would list you by name and how much you've given and what city you lived in. So everybody knew whether you gave or not. But James and Ellen were always right at the top of the list. They gave to everything. And James had to make money. I mean, how else could he make all those kind of donations? Some from the royalties from his wife's books, and some, of course, from things that he sold and things that he did. But he was a very creative individual, and I know sometimes I've asked young girls when they look at these pictures of James and Ellen White, and he, of course, is bald-headed, and he's got a big beard, and he looks old, and I'll say to the girls, what do you think Ellen saw in him? Why do you think she ever wanted to marry him? And of course, they usually laugh, but what she saw in him was a creative man who was thoroughly committed to God, and one that loved her. Now, of course, they did have some stresses in a marriage, like any marriage, but loved her. He once wrote that she was the crown of his rejoicing, and in turn she said about him, she thought he was the best man that ever trod shoe leather. So they had a working relationship focused on advancing the kingdom of God, one that was built on mutual respect, and one that when you get to know James a little bit, you can understand what she saw in him.